Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What I'm going to tell you today is that the members of Parliament are actually directors of a corporation. That is what you're electing. And because you're only electing directors of a corporation, nothing will ever change. It will go in the same direction forever. Because politics is not what you think it is. The members of Parliament, anybody seen this before? This is Dun & Bradstreet. Do you know what Dun & Bradstreet is? Right. If you were going to do business with a corporation or a company in the world, then you can use Dun & Bradstreet, which at the moment is about 160 million corporations worldwide. You can use these to find out if that corporation does good business. Does it have any debts? Has it got any county court judgments against it? So what this is a register of corporations, of companies. And the members of Parliament are a company. Gordon Brown is a company. David Cameron is a company. And this one I like. The Labour Party trade as Alistair Darling MP. It's their trading name. It's just there. The reason they trade with Alistair Darling MP is because Alistair Darling is a diplomat. There's about 3 of them. If they trade in his name, that trading name has diplomatic status. That means they can bend things and do things that you don't know about. It's a whole different way of doing things. This is what politics is about. This is what you believe to be the people representing you.
The market collapse has brought a call from the Labour MP Austin Mitchell for the postponement of the BP sale. Joining me now from our Westminster studio is Labour's spokesman on city affairs, Tony Blair. Well, Mr. Blair, the Chancellor is saying there's no reason to panic, that everybody should keep calm, and it's all rather absurd. Is that Labour's view?
Look into my eyes, look into my eyes. The eyes, not around the eyes. Don't look around the eyes, look into my eyes. You're under.
Well, I don't think panic's ever a very good idea, and certainly not at a time like this. I also think that it is true to say that the very particular collapse we've had over the last couple of days can't be a reflection of any real economic factors. But I think the real problem that we're left with is that we now have an economy that is so locked into international trading, so dependent on what happens in America, that anything that happens in Wall Street then reverberates right round the world. Now, the key lesson that we've got to take out of this is the necessity for governments of any political colour to work together in order to stop the excesses of the free market, because that's what's really been shown over the last couple of days.
What specifically would you have the government do, would you do if you were the government?
Well, it is very difficult to offer, and indeed there aren't any magic solutions in the short term. But I think in the long term, what is important is that we keep the process of international coordination going on exchange rates and monetary stability. What is absolutely vital is that you don't get countries simply going off on their own and provoking a situation of international financial anarchy, which is really what's obtained over the last couple of days.
3, 2, 1, you're back in the room.
Madam Speaker, having fought the general election on a platform of no 100 days of dynamic action, the definition of dynamic action changing from one Prime Minister to another, and having introduced a Queen's speech with 26 bills, much to the delight of the public, having made the Bank of England independent, having severed the supervision of the Bank of England from banking, having introduced a new regulation for the City of London, can the Prime Minister tell the House what he proposes as an encore?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. It is, of course, important that we start to make a difference in those areas where the people of this country elected us to make a difference. In our schools, in rebuilding our National Health Service, in giving hope to our young people, and of course in the measures that my honourable friend quite rightly says in relation to the Bank of England. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, took decisive action right at the very beginning, and I believe he is to be congratulated for that. It is far better now that we take the politics out of setting interest rates, that we do not play politics with people's mortgages, and indeed, as the Association of Estate Agents was saying just the other day, in the long term that will lead to lower mortgage rates and therefore a better deal for homeowners.
One of the first places these toxic products landed was the financial district of London, England, nicknamed the City. There was a golden age here in the years before the meltdown. The wild atmosphere in Britain was brought about because Chancellor of the Exchequer Gordon Brown was easing financial regulation there. He called his new approach the light touch.
We will advance if there is light touch regulation, a competitive tax environment, and flexible.
Well, Gordon Brown Light Touch was an effort really to make the City of London the world's greatest financial centre. And it meant giving the financiers, giving the bankers a very free hand in the marketplace.
Paul Martin was Canada's finance minister in those years. He says deregulation came about because of a competition between New York and London to become the financial capital of the world.
The race to become #1 was very, very important. But how do you attract the financial industry? Well, the most logical way is what they call regulatory arbitrage, which simply says, let's gut the regulatory system, and therefore more people will come.
Geraint Anderson arrived in the city as a young trader in 1996. He had been a hippie selling trinkets on the beaches of India until his older brother found him a job in a London brokerage.
I literally didn't know what the city was. I mean, I kind of was aware that there was a stock market, and I said, well, why? I mean, you have to wear a suit and things like that. And he said, I'll tell you why. It's quite simple. You'll have about £300,000-400,000 within about 4 or 5 years, and then you can go off and live the life you want to live. Since the selling of trinkets wasn't going down too well, I thought, why not? I had no idea about finance whatsoever. I didn't know what a PE ratio was. I didn't know what a yield was. When you're in the city, all you have to do continually is present a view and present it strongly and pretend you believe in it. It was all about schmoozing clients, taking them to strip joints, taking them to bars, getting that company credit card out and really giving it a bash.
By 2004, Geraint Anderson was making a salary of $300,000 a year, plus an annual bonus of $700,000. He was invited onto business television shows as an analyst.
We had profit before tax growth of 9.5%. The whole game is increasing your bonus. You don't go into the city to do the world some good. You go there to make money as quickly as possible. And if that means lying, cheating and stealing, that's what you do. Regulators and politicians are just deemed to be idiots. It's all about, we will thrive with light touch regulation. And that, of course, is exactly what Gordon Brown was encouraging as Chancellor of the Exchequer. And interestingly, he calls my precise period in the city the age of irresponsibility. But it was partly to do with the fact he just said, anything goes.
In September 2007, as cracks were appearing in the foundations of the global economy, the titans of the Anglo-American financial system began to tremble. First up was Britain's Adam Applegarth, a true superstar in London's business class. Applegarth had it all. He joined an obscure bank called Northern Rock in 1983 and had a meteoric rise, becoming CEO of the bank in 2001.
Oh, he was a brilliant fellow, full of himself, full of confidence, felt he could do no wrong, loved the idea that he was become a transatlantic jet setter. He'd go over to New York to arrange the next tranche of securitized debt, and felt he had a model which was much better than everybody else. He didn't get it. He didn't get that he developed an unstable model, and that if the wholesale markets went wrong, his bank would fall off a cliff very, very fast, which is exactly what happened.
Good evening. One of Britain's biggest mortgage lenders, Northern Rock, is applying to the Bank of England for emergency financial support. BBC News has learned that the bank...
Within hours of the BBC bulletin, worried Northern Rock customers lined up to get their money out.
Maybe it's safe, maybe it's not, but I'd rather know that it was safe. I'm just going to go put it in my bank and then...
And I've taken all of my money out.
Most people in the Western world had never seen a bank run before with their own eyes, and so it was something they found almost impossible to imagine.
Adam Applegarth was hauled before a British parliamentary investigation of the failure of his bank, but he was characteristically defiant.
Mr. Applegarth, do you actually accept you've done anything wrong?
It was a good business model, but clearly couldn't deal with the unforeseen global freezing of the liquid markets.
You keep saying it was unforeseen, yet this committee had been discussing it for 6 months.
What specifically would you have the government do, would you do if you were the government?
What is absolutely vital is that you don't get countries simply going off on their own and provoking a situation of international financial anarchy, which is really what's obtained over the last couple of days.
Yeah, very good to talk to you, Mr. McDonald. You feel that the government should have gone the whole hog here and bought all the banks out?
Well, I think this is a really poor deal. We're putting up £50 billion of taxpayers' money. We're getting preference shares preference shares with no vote, so therefore no controlling interest. We can't even put people on their boards. The preference shares will be bought in those banks who are really need it, and they're the ones with the dodgiest debt. So we're nationalising the loss-making banks by the looks of it in partial form. But in addition to that, what it will mean is that for this deal, we'll have to increase our borrowing, which means putting up taxes, which also means cuts in public expenditure, reducing demand in the economy, which will deepen and lengthen the recession. So my constituents will pay for this deal with their taxes, and as a result of the recession, with the loss of jobs, and some of them with the loss of their homes. So I think this is a very poor deal.
Tony Blair has reportedly made £30 million since leaving Number 10. How he makes at least some of that money is controversial. He's paid about £3 million a year to advise investment bank JP Morgan and Zurich International. He runs his own consultancy firm that advises governments such as Kuwait. He has 150 staff on board and owns property worth £14 million in the UK alone. He's costing British taxpayers £400,000 a year. That's over £2 million to date. The annual costs include a £70,000 prime ministerial pension, the maximum he can receive, a £115,000 allowance to carry out his public work, and £250,000 on his security team, including round-the-clock police protection.
Can't you hear that jingle jangle sound? Oh yeah! It's money, money, money by the pound.
Growth over the past 20 years, 25 years, nobody paid it much attention. But now that the world's entering into the synchronized global pullback or recession, and in some cases a depression, then these items are coming to the surface. For example, the 20 to 30 trillion of wealth that's held offshore. And most of that wealth, of course, goes through Britain, goes through the UK, because Britain has the least regulated financial markets in the world. That's why MF Global was in Britain. Lehman Brothers went through Britain. Bernie Madoff went through Britain. The latest Peregrine scandal went through Britain. JP Morgan's $2 to $9 billion loss on their balance sheet happened in London. So London is really the headquarters for global banking fraud. And even though the economy is contracting in Britain, I notice that the banking sector is still making huge profits. The Barclays chief operating officer that was caught committing fraud just got a golden parachute of £8 million. So as I've said, until you get rid of the financial terrorists, then you're going to continue to get, you're going to have these weapons of mass financial destruction blow up in your face and cause all kinds of death and destruction. It's as simple as that, really. I mean, if you see a banker with Gucci's in a briefcase, don't let him on an airplane. Don't let any bankers on airplanes, because they fly to countries around the world and they have weapons of mass financial destruction, whether it's in Greece or it's in the UK or all over Europe, and they blow up economies with fake debt, and then they just strip those economies clean for any assets. So that's your big terrorist threat. Barclays just caught laundering, along with HSBC, hundreds of billions of dollars of Mexican drug cartel. Barclays caught in a LIBOR scandal. HSBC caught in a LIBOR scandal. So what more do you want? The HSBC funded the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Tony Blair, his response this week, he said, well, I'm not sure hanging 20 bankers at the end of the road is a great idea. Well, you know, at least he's thinking in the, you know, kind of the right way. He finally understands that it is the bankers. He, of course, is on the board of directors for J.P. Morgan, doing deals in the Mideast, leveraging his contacts after his genocide in Iraq.
People say to me, society's broken. Well, what I'm going to tell you today is it's not broken. It works exactly the way it was planned to work. Because this goes back hundreds of years. This is not something that's new.
It was the 1800s. America was growing, and vast financial empires were being built. Into this era of opportunity, one powerful man emerged, a man who pulled the financial strings of wealthy men and entire countries. A man who brought order to chaos. J. Pierpont Morgan. Twice, he was called on by American presidents to save the nation's economy. Both times, he was criticized for wielding the power to be able to do so. He amassed a personal fortune, spending his riches in ways that inspired some and outraged others. He was corpulent and intimidating. One contemporary said meeting his blazing dark eyes was like confronting the headlights of an express train bearing down on you. J. Pierpont Morgan was as powerful as a world leader. Wall Street was his empire.
The Rothschild family is one of the wealthiest families the world has ever known. By the early 1800s, they established themselves as the most important bankers in all Europe. By the end of the 19th century, said to control half the wealth of the world. As Rothschild biographer Derek Wilson explains, Rothschild critics have justification for their anxiety. The House of Rothschild is immensely more powerful than any financial empire that has ever preceded it, and it's able to control governments behind the scenes, secretly.
Mayer Rothschild had 5 sons. He trained them all in the skills of money creation, then sent them out to the major capitals of Europe to open branch offices of the family banking business. His first son, Amschel Mayer, stayed in Frankfurt to mind the hometown bank. His second son, Solomon, was sent to Vienna. His third son, Nathan, was clearly the most clever. He was sent to London at age 21 in 1798, 100 years after the founding of the Bank of England. His fourth son, Karl, went to Naples, and his fifth son, Jacob, went to Paris. Rothschilds soon grew unbelievably wealthy. By the mid-1800s, they dominated all European banking and were certainly the wealthiest family in the world. They financed Cecil Rhodes, making it possible for him to establish a monopoly over the diamond and gold fields of South Africa. In America, they financed the Harrimans and railroads, the Vanderbilts and railroads and the press, and Carnegie in the steel industry, among many others. In fact, during World War I, J.P. Morgan was thought to be the richest man in America. But after his death, it was discovered that he was actually only a lieutenant of the Rothschilds. By 1850, James Rothschild, the heir of the French branch of the family, was said to be worth 600 million French francs, 150 million more than all the other bankers in France put together. He built this mansion called Ferrier, just east of Paris. Wilhelm I, on seeing it, exclaimed, "Kings couldn't afford this. It could only belong to a Rothschild." Money changers, those who loan out and manipulate the quantity of money, were active in medieval England. In fact, they were so active that acting together, they could manipulate the entire English economy. These were not bankers per se. The money changers generally were the goldsmiths. They were the first bankers because they started keeping other people's gold for safekeeping in their vaults. The first paper money was merely a receipt for gold left at the goldsmith. Paper money caught on because it was more convenient than carrying around a lot of heavy gold and silver coins. Eventually, goldsmiths noticed that only a small fraction of the depositors ever came in and demanded their gold at any one time. Goldsmiths started cheating on the system. They discovered that they could print more money than they had gold, and usually no one would be the wiser. Then they could loan out this extra money and collect interest on it. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking. That is, loaning out many times more money than you have assets on deposit. So, if $1,000 in gold were deposited with them, they could loan out about $10,000 in paper money and draw interest payments on it, and no one would ever discover the deception. By this means, goldsmiths gradually accumulated more and more wealth and used this wealth to accumulate more and more gold. Today, this practice of loaning out more money than there are reserves is known as fractional reserve banking. Every bank in the United States is allowed to loan out at least 10 times more money than they actually have. That's why they get rich on charging, let's say, 8% interest. It's not really 8% per year, which is their income. It's 80%. That's why bank buildings are always the largest in town.
If you have the money, you can get any law passed you want. So who do you care, whether Bill Clinton is president or who is senator from New Jersey? It doesn't make any difference because you write a check and you get another senator.
One of the stickiest questions in this debate is this: just who owns the Federal Reserve?
The City of London set the whole thing up. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York is principally owned by 5 merchant banks in London, chartered by the Bank of England.
Perhaps England, which many have considered a political satellite of the United States in recent years, is really the one pulling the strings of international policy.
It's not a matter of who owns the Fed, it's who controls it. The government has given the banks a monopoly, and then you see the Justice Department doing nothing about the bank mergers. A monopoly can only exist with government assistance, and they've given great assistance to the banking monopoly.
And the Federal Reserve responsible for 3 of the biggest tragedies of the 20th century: World War I, World War II, and the Great Depression.
Wars are very profitable. In fact, wars are probably the most profitable thing an international banker can be involved in. So consequently, throughout the last at least 300 years of North American and European history, you see incidents of international bankers backing both sides of a conflict.
They've been trying to have a war in Europe since 1885, but the central banks of Europe had already bankrupted all the nations of Europe. They had no money. The only money was here in the United States. In order to get that money, they had to put a central bank over on the American people.
It was sold as a way to bring stability to the American economy. Well, what happens just a little over a decade after the passage of the Fed? We see the biggest depression of this century in any case.
For the 16 months prior to the crash of '29, the Federal Reserve increased the money supply by 62%. Now, what was happening back then? Much like it's happening today. People were buying and selling, pledging and borrowing, thinking the good times would never end. And then at the time of the crash, they pulled the plug on the money supply, and the people who had pledged their stocks, their bonds, their homes, their cars, everything. They pledged their savings accounts. They lost it all.
Selling guns to one adversary while making loans to another is a common way these boys make their profits during war. And when profits begin sagging, people like Jacob Schiff, Max Warburg, and J.P. Morgan knew how to build them up again. Surprise, surprise, it's a documented fact that these fellows financed Trotsky and Lenin with billions in gold and credit to initiate the revolution in Russia. With Russia out of the war and America in, the conflict was extended by at least another 2 years. 2 more glorious years of gun sales and wartime bank loans, upon which to earn interest for many more years to come.
There is no question that war is a profit-making business. After World War I, Senator Gerald Nye held very famous hearings here in Washington where he dragged in some of the biggest bankers and industrialists and put them on the spot and just examined profits that were made by some of these major interests. war is a profit-making business. Anybody who says otherwise is a liar or a fool.
They were able to manipulate us into World War I, and as a matter of fact, the war stretched out for at least another 2 years beyond what it would have gone.
Just when you think you're ahead of the game, someone changes the rules.
They did this knowing, with malice aforethought, to strengthen their own profits and to build their own institutions, their own banking institutions.
Many people believe that virtually all of the wars of this century have been caused for reasons that benefit small financial groups, those that move in the sphere of influence of the Bilderberg and Trilateral Commission.
Who has been financing the Soviet Union, their military industrial complex? The United States has. European bankers have. So the bankers have been financing both sides of every major conflict. Conflict brings progress, but controlled conflict brings controlled progress. Every major war, every major conflict, arms sales, loaning money to governments. You get their people to pay you interest back into the coffers of the bank, money that you created out of nothing.
Do you believe that Israel is genuinely planning to do some kind of preemptive strike based on the rhetoric we're now hearing? And if they do, what should the reaction be, particularly of America, but also other allied countries?
Well, is Israel absolutely determined that Iran should not acquire nuclear weapons capability? Yes. I mean, how they prevent that is another matter. But, I mean, it is clear that Iran continues to work towards getting that capability. And for Israel, I mean, the president of Iran just a few days back was questioning Israel's right to exist. So you can understand why they feel this is an existential question for them. Now, I still think it's possible that a combination of sanctions and negotiations can resolve this, but you've got to say that time is marching on, and so is their nuclear weapons program, and Israel will feel obviously alarmed and threatened by it.
If they do something, should America do anything, or does America keep out of this?
We're not at that point yet. The United States of America, by the way, has also given an absolutely clear and firm statement on this, that Iran with a nuclear weapon is unacceptable. And by the way, I'm quite sure President Obama, when he says that, he means it and intends to stand by it. So I think America is also giving a very strong message to Iran, but everybody wants to resolve this without a conflict, because that is sensible and the best way of doing it, because the consequences of any conflict would be very serious, although profoundly unpredictable.
We have only a few moments left. Fidel Castro, who is not a capitalist, yesterday you said capitalism is the major problem in the world. Fidel Castro was critical of you for denying the Holocaust. He said that Iran should try to understand the unique history of anti-Semitism. How do you respond to Castro? Certainly not a friend of Israel.
A site related to the Zionist regime issued this news. Mr. Castro sent a message to me yesterday and said that it was untrue, this statement, that his statements were interpreted differently, that he had said something different. So I have no opinion here on this statement, but I'd like to ask, why is there so much insistence in the United States to absolutely defend the Zionist regime? What is the relationship between the U.S. government, 10,000 kilometers across the ocean from the Zionist regime, and the need, therefore, to support it? Why is it so sensitive?
Because a massive group of people were annihilated just for being what they were. 7 million were killed, 8 million. So as a humanitarian country, we care about this. And many Jews came here to live, and many Jews created a country in Israel and want to live in peace. Don't you? Now, Castro did say you should recognize anti-Semitism exists in the world, and we all should be concerned about it.
Is that the real issue, the U.S. government wants to defend human rights?
Of course.
Well, where were these people killed? Were they killed in Palestine by the hands of Palestinians?
It doesn't matter where they were killed. It's that fact that they were killed.
Then it's all right for a million Iraqi people to be killed, and then it would be okay if they decide to come and occupy the United States. They were killed in Iraq. Would you allow them to come occupy the United States and
Are you
take
saying,
over?
you're not saying the United States committed genocide? You're saying the United States committed genocide?
That's a separate discussion, and yes, it did happen in both Iraq and Afghanistan, but that's a separate issue. I'd like to ask you, if in a country someone's right is violated, they are oppressed, assuming that your assumption, your statement is correct, does that imply that they can go and occupy another land? Is there any logic in that? If we were to follow that logic, will there be any security left in the world? In World War II, 100 million or 80 million people were killed. If they were to go occupy 20 countries around the world, that would have been terrible.
The land was legally created. Israel is a legal state.
So the question is, you see, come on, the question. You just said yourself it's over the Holocaust. Why are you changing your statement? My question is, what are the interests of the United States in absolutely defending them? There are many parts of the world where human rights are violated. Do you know how many American Indians were killed? Do you know or not?
I know.
I mean, you're a reporter. You should have the answers to this.
We're out of time. We'll pick this up next year with the president of Iran. I'm Larry King. Don't go away.
It was in 1917 that the British Foreign Secretary Lord Balfour promised to establish a national home for Jewish people inside Palestine. The Balfour Declaration, as it came to be known, was viewed with suspicion by the Arabs right from the start, but their concerns were to be ignored after the Holocaust gave European Jews an urgency to find a home. And so the State of Israel was born, and immediately thousands of Jewish refugees entered the country, many of them secular Jews with no connection to the land. It inevitably created a problem for the indigenous Palestinian population, and indeed their Arab neighbors. They viewed Israel as a state created on stolen land, and vehemently opposed the end of Muslim sovereignty over what is Islam's third holiest site, Jerusalem. For Israel's Arab neighbors, they contested the creation of an American satellite state in the Middle East, and one that is armed to the teeth by US-supplied weapons. All this led to a total of 8 wars in Israel's 59-year history, and in each conflict, Israel has maintained and extended its territories with the help, of course, of its superpower ally. But underneath big conflicts that make the headlines, there's been the ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories. Nearly 500,000 Jewish homes form part of the settlements in the West Bank, and even though Israel held its withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005, many see that as a strategic move rather than a hand of peace. The high-profile withdrawal from this deeply impoverished strip provided cover for the annexing of yet more land from the West Bank. And there remains wider opposition to Israel, not just from countries that it occupies, but from countries like Bangladesh and Malaysia, who simply have no diplomatic ties with it. At the end of 59 years, the Israeli state says it's created a home to displaced Jews from around the world. They enjoy a high standard of living. They boast of democracy and civil freedoms. But Israel has gone from being a possible sanctuary to what is now the most dangerous place for Jews in the world, a killing machine that's constantly embroiled in conflict with its neighbors. It's caused a massive refugee crisis by forcing the expulsion of thousands of Palestinians who now live in third world conditions. It's building a wall around their homes, making it even more difficult for movement. And it frequently invades or launches airstrikes on Palestinian homes, imprisoning their men, women and children. And despite various peace agreements, the Zionist state has refused to address key issues like the Palestinians' right of return or the status of Jerusalem as a capital city for a future Palestinian state. As far as military strength and standards of living goes, in 59 years Israel has raced ahead, achieving more than other countries can in centuries. But when it comes to diplomacy with its neighbours and justice for the Palestinians, this is a country that is still crawling towards peace.
Germany won the First World War by 1916 without a single shot being fired on German soil. British convoys were blown out of the Atlantic by German subs, the French army mutinied, and the Russian army was defecting. With British Prime Minister Lloyd George up against a wall, Lionel Rothschild and the Jewish Zionists offered the British a deal they couldn't refuse. "We'll bring the United States into the war as your ally and win the war for you," they said, "if you'll promise us Palestine." In April of 1917, President Wilson got the green light and declared war on Germany. Because of overwhelming opposition to the war, Wilson invoked the draft and passed the Espionage Act, forcing Americans to fight or be thrown in jail. Billions of U.S. taxpayers' money was delivered to the British war machine, money that was never repaid. In return, the British government wrote the famous Balfour Declaration and addressed it to none other than Lord Lionel Rothschild. The declaration promised Palestine and Israel to the Rothschild Zionists.
In 1817, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine by the Earl of Balfour, a policy endorsed by Woodrow Wilson and by the League of Nations, which made Palestine a British mandate.
With the fall of Nazi Germany, the Rothschilds wasted no time waving their Balfour Declaration at the British government and reminding them of their written promise to give them Palestine. But how could the British promise the Arab land of Palestine to the Jews? In 1917, the British parachuted free opium and hashish to the Turkish troops and stole Palestine from them.
One ingenious stratagem was to parachute hashish and opium to the Turkish troops to try to keep their minds off the fighting. Allenby's strategy worked brilliantly.
During World War II, the British needed Arab oil and signed an agreement with the Arabs which forbid Jewish immigration into Palestine. Then at the end of the war, the British broke their agreement with the Arabs and allowed the Rothschild Jewish Zionists to smuggle hundreds of thousands of Jews from around the world into Palestine. To win public support, the Rothschilds, who owned Reuters and the Associated Press, bombarded their media empire with images of homeless Jewish Holocaust refugees crowded together in ships off the coast of Palestine. On October 24, 1945, the bankster pirates gave birth to their most powerful weapon of global control, the United Nations. According to plan, the British pulled out of Palestine and gave the land to the Jewish Zionists. In 1948, the bankster-controlled United Nations officially turned Palestine into the Zionist State of Israel. To deal with the millions of Palestinian residents, the Israeli Jews massacred and drove them from their villages and homeland. The Jews herded the Palestinians into two separated regions called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The Rothschilds soon began financing Jewish Holocaust refugees to build illegal Jewish settlements on Palestinian land. These illegal Jewish settlements set the stage for Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's reign of terror against Palestinians who dared to defend what was left of their stolen homeland. Like Saddam Hussein, Sharon violated dozens of UN resolutions by using hundreds of tanks and American-supplied gunships and planes in an unrelenting campaign of bombing, murdering, bulldozing, starving, and terrorizing the Palestinians off of what remained of their land. In violation of international law, Israel also secretly developed over 100 nuclear weapons of mass destruction capable of vaporizing the entire Middle East. Defenseless against Israel's U.S.-backed military and media campaign, the Palestinian Muslims fought back with sticks and stones and suicide as their only means of defense against the wholesale theft of their ancient homeland. The Rothschilds, whose front companies had helped finance Hitler and the Jewish slave labor camps, had turned Jewish Holocaust victims into victimizers. Imprisoned inside barbed wire refugee camps, the Palestinians began to resemble the victims of Nazi concentration camps. According to author Simon Schama, the Rothschilds own 80% of the land of Israel. Even the flag of Israel flies the hexagram symbol from the Rothschild family's red shield. The Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s. Reuters then bought the Associated Press, which selects and delivers the same news stories to the entire world, day after day. They have controlling interest in 3 major television networks and easily avoid media attention since they own it. Until recently, they owned and operated England's Royal Mint and continue to be the gold agent for the Bank of England, which they also direct. They control the LBMA, London Bullion Market Association, where 30 to 42 million ounces of gold worth over $11 billion are traded daily. The Rothschilds earn millions weekly just on transaction fees alone. They also fix the world price of gold on a daily basis and profit from its ups and downs. Over the centuries, the Rothschilds have amassed trillions of dollars worth of gold bullion in their subterranean vaults and have cornered the world's gold supply. They own controlling interest in the world's largest oil company, Royal Dutch Shell. They operate phony charities and offshore banking services where the wealth of the black nobility in the Vatican is hidden in secret accounts at Rothschild Swiss banks, trusts, and holding companies. Although Evelyn Rothschild looks like a harmless gray-haired old man, make no mistake about it, Rothschild and his ancestors have handpicked presidents, crashed stock markets, bankrupted nations, orchestrated wars, and sponsored the mass murder and impoverishment of millions. The wealth hoarded by this one family alone could feed, clothe, and shelter every human being on earth.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
In 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff signed a document that was, what they were going to do is they were going to arm Cuban friendlies and have them attack Guantanamo Bay. Could have easily killed U.S. soldiers, right? They were going to put a drone plane in the air and blow it up and blame it on the Cubans, and that was going to make people want to go to war with Cuba. There was all these different things that they were doing to get people enthusiastic about going to war with
I mean, that's real.
Yeah, it's real.
That's a fact.
Signed by the Joint Chiefs. It wasn't like an idea that someone came up with it. No, they signed it.
They put it together.
Kennedy.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
I mean, they're able to kind of say to people, don't come and bother us because we will kill you. And my attitude is that now's the time to be firm. And we've got a great weapon on our side, and that is freedom and liberty. And it's got those two concepts have got the capacity to defeat ideologies of hate.
I don't think actually it's anything to do with a loss of American influence at all. I think we've got to go back and ask what changed policy, because policy has changed in the past few years. And what changed policy was September the 11th. That changed policy, but actually before September the 11th, this global movement with a global ideology was already in being. September the 11th was the culmination of what they wanted to do.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
I saw that morning, being down here now, as different as it looks, I still have those visuals, those images in my mind, in my head.
We're on, as a nation, officially now,
suicide bombers. It happens in Israel on a daily basis. Those are the things we have to be careful of now, we have to watch for now.
Do you expect suicide bombers? Plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center 1 year ago. Hundreds of people have gathered here at Ground Zero to mark the anniversary in what is expected to be, we tell you that the anniversary ceremony will also include several moments of silence, marking the times that the hijacked jets hit the place roses on the site for a flower arrangement that will be turned into a permanent.
What is that? Now, if you are a person that is of the normal composition of U.S. society, you would say, hey, that's that thing that's on the $1 bill, the eye above the pyramid. However, if you're part of a fringe minority in the United States, this is not a symbol of American currency, but a sign of an international banking cartel which is poisoning the water supply and trying to eradicate all of humanity. The joys of fringe college life. I'm here today to talk about something, and this is kind of a public service announcement, is against all these people that are super duper into the New World Order, Illuminati, Knights Templar, Bilderberg conspiracy theories. Generally, I just want all of you to know that you're a bunch of morons. I think you are absolutely wrong-headed, you're misguided, you're being exploited, and you're really wasting both your time and your life putting on this phony, fraudulent battle against something which really does not exist.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
My cat does not know there is an internet. But there is an internet. But to the cat, the internet is inconceivable because he doesn't have the mental apparatus to conceive of it.
Wow, man. That's some heavy shit, man.
And because you're only electing directors of a corporation, nothing will ever change. It will go in the same direction forever.
About the credit crunch which lies at the heart of it. The real problem we've got in the British economy today is that small and medium-sized businesses and even some large businesses cannot get overdrafts and loans and credit from the banks. There's a crunch.
In the coming weeks, we face some important decisions about how to pay down our debt in a way that grows our economy and creates good jobs. Decisions that will make a real difference in the strength and pace of our recovery.
I have been crystal clear about my position on Iran possessing a nuclear weapon. That is a red line for us. It's something that would not only be dangerous for Israel, but would be dangerous for the world, be dangerous for U.S. national security interests.
I think we're moving back to some international questions now. Another video.
Hello, Prime Minister. My question is this. What is the wisdom of aggressively pursuing Iran for its nuclear program, whilst Israel, which is the region's only rogue nuclear state, receives no comparable attention? And can you see how this double standard may constitute a destabilizing factor in the region?
It's a fair question, isn't it?
I make 2 points to Tim. First of all, we support the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we believe that everyone should fulfill their obligations under that treaty. But I would make this point about Iran, which I think does make Iran a special case. I can't think of another country, actually, anywhere in the world that has actually said it wants to obliterate one of its neighboring countries. It has said that about Israel. That seems to me to make it materially different from other countries, to make that statement that it wants to wipe another country in its neighborhood off the map.
The last thing the men behind the curtain want is a conscious, informed public capable of critical thinking, which is why a continually fraudulent zeitgeist is output via religion, the mass media, and the educational system. They seek to keep you in a distracted, naive bubble, and they are doing a damn good job of it.
They do not want you to think too much. That is why our country and our world has become so proliferated with entertainments, mass media, television shows, amusement parks, drugs, alcohol, and every kind of entertainment to keep the human mind entertained. so that you don't get in the way of important people by doing too much thinking.
Reality? Reality? Is that you? Don't fucking wind me up. I've had my head up my arse for so long. All I can do is think shit.